Welcome back, guys. It's Thomas, and there's a few toy tubers that for the month of May, they are doing May the 4th. Not just May the 4th, not just May the 5th. They're celebrating the whole month of May by doing some retro or older Star Wars figures. Now, I wasn't necessarily invited to do this, but I figured I already did that video on the Revenge of the Sith figures, so I have a few days left of May, so I thought it would be fun to go through some of my favorite highlights of this era of Star Wars collecting. This episode is purely focused on one of my favorite characters, Darth Maul. So here I have an assortment of all of my Darth Maul figures, all from the Phantom Menace or 3.75 inch figure line. So some range from episode 1, some figures came out later, and we'll kind of go over that. But I figured we go over these figures one by one, talk about how they're different, what makes them great, and what are some of their really cool features. So let's start off with the action figure that started it all. Darth Maul's very first action figure. And this one is what got me hype. I remember I was growing up in Brooklyn, and I was in Wallbaum's. That was a grocery store back in Brooklyn. And I don't think they exist anymore. And I remember my dad was checking out, and there was an Obi-Wan and a Darth Maul, and I begged to have these figures. Imagine going into a grocery store and they had action figures, kind of like where the gum is. That's where this guy was. That's how hard they were pushing this line of Star Wars figures. The media blitz for these movies was insane, but that was my gateway into Star Wars and Star Wars collecting. And as my first Star Wars figure, I thought Darth Maul was pretty badass. This figure still looks badass. I mean, his face sculpt, really good. The fact that they got this much detail in such a small figure, really cool. And this is the first time we ever saw any variation of a lightsaber, a double-bladed lightsaber. So we knew what to expect with Star Wars figures. The articulation got a little better at this time. It wasn't your standard 5 POA like we saw with like Power of the Force 1 or 2. Now we were starting to get some elbow articulation, and we were starting to get some swivel at the waist. Really cool. And I just always found this figure to be super awesome. Now, I remember which lightsabers go with which Darth Maul. This one was pretty skinny. It had the black lines going around the handle, so I always know which lightsaber to match with the figure, which I find really interesting because with things or toys that I get today, I have to look up what goes with them because I don't remember. But if you remember this figure, then you remember they came with the Comtech chip. I still have all my Comtech chips, and I've held on to these. They're super fun, and this really helped build the story when you're playing with Star Wars. I have almost all of them for episode 1. They started releasing trilogy figures with the Comtech chip. I may have one in here. I think I have Luke, but I wish this would have continued into episode 2 and 3. These are so cool. If you were playing with figures at this time, it just really opened up the storytelling you can do. And what a great time to be alive as a Star Wars collector. I'm going to bring this up more than one time in this episode, but my older brother, big into wrestling, sports, that was his thing. I was into sci-fi, comics, that was my thing. I was heavily collecting Star Wars at the time, and the time of collecting where we were getting these chips. He had, for his wrestlers, the Titantron. So we both had some kind of figures that had the same technology, just I think the Star Wars thing was a little cooler. Don't get me wrong, Titantron was awesome, but the fact that he had something that was similar for wrestling, and I had this for Star Wars. What an awesome time to be a collector. Not only do I have the chips, but I have the Comtech reader, and I love this thing. I use this all the time. This was great if you were playing with it and you wanted some sound effects, but it was also cool, I guess, if you were role-playing, if you had a lightsaber and you were a kid, this would act as your comm. So really cool. I had to find a 9-volt battery in my house, which I had to steal it from a stud finder, and it still works, which is really fun. So These buttons really don't do anything. They just kind of, you know, tell you to buzz off. But then you had these other buttons. Lightsaber noise. And then you had some lasers. So if you were playing with action figures and they were blasting some guns, you could just boop, 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 boop. You could play with this thing. Super awesome. And I have Darth Maul's, so I haven't heard this in God knows how long, so I wonder if this still works, but you just put it over here. Pretty cool. And I think there was more than one phrase, so...
If the trace was correct, I will find them quickly, Master.
Oh my God, that's so cool. So, 2 phrases so far.
At last, we will have revenge.
Looks like we're tapping out at 2 phrases, but I'm going to put these away for now. But I love this Comtech era figures. Toy Games just posted a video today of Watto. Really cool. I have that figure somewhere along the lines, and he said, if you don't have the Comtech reader, you can use them as keychains. So if you're collecting these now and the Comtechs are hard to come by, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Put it on as a keychain. But this is the first ever Darth Maul action figure. Probably one of my prized possessions, and I absolutely love this guy. Okay, here is the second Darth Maul action figure that I have. This one's cool, however, a little limited of the articulation because of the molded cloak that he's wearing. But what made him different? The thing that made this guy different, he was one of the few Darth Maul figures that came with the full handle, but with only one of the lasers or the lightsaber sticking out. So really cool. I do like this guy. Really, you can't do many poses with him. There was one other figure that I think came from a 3-pack. He was in more of an exaggerated pose that came with that sort of lightsaber. It was Qui-Gon, Anakin, and Darth Maul. Never had it, but I had this guy, so I never felt like I needed that. But this guy was always pretty cool. And breaking out the comm reader again, he came with his own chip. So I'm curious, I wonder if they actually gave him different noises or if it's the same. It's been so long, I don't remember, but let's check it out. Change the picture on it at least. Did they change the sound?
It's the Jedi.
Doesn't really sound like Ray Park.
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi.
At last we will have revenge. Oh, he doesn't even complete the line. Anyways, still fun. I think these things were limited to 2 phrases, so that's all the Comtech chips I have. This thing's awesome. I wonder how much this is selling for on the secondary market, but really cool piece. All right, moving on from our standard Darth Maul, let's check out the next. Star Wars was great at giving us these small vehicles at a low price point, came with the figure. This one just happens to be accurate from the film. They would do smaller versions of vehicles, like the battle tank with the battle droids. I had the big tank, but then if you wanted a mini one that could have been something that existed off camera, it still matched, which was really cool. This one, like I said, this one fits the scene. It's exactly how it looked. I think this has been released in Black Series. I don't collect Black Series. But what makes this one different? Lots of things. So other than checking out the vehicle, let's do that. I'll get Darth Maul off here. So 1, accuracy, cheap toy. I think they nailed it. This thing probably didn't retail for more than 20 bucks if I had to guess. It says Kenner on it, man. So you know this, I think Hasbro didn't take over Star Wars until Attack of the Clones. Had a little switch here, boom, hit that. And then if you hit it again, it'll send out this probe droid. So really cool on the vehicle front. This thing is awesome. Now this wasn't accurate, but there was a hole there. And this Darth Maul came with a pretty distinctive lightsaber. This one's thicker than the one that comes with the standard Darth Maul. And if you wanted to, you can kind of just put it there just to hold it, even though it didn't really fit there or make sense there. But let's check out the figure. Now, a few things off the bat make this figure special. 1, comes with a cloth cloak. Now this thing is awesome. This like long pieces by the sleeves, really cool. Now, this guy has some pretty decent articulation, so you can turn his wrist and then his waist, and then he has the knee joint, which is cool, so he can get on the Sith speeder. Really awesome. But this one, I think they went a little above and beyond with this face sculpt. And I mean, something so tiny, they made it look just as good as the actor. There's figures nowadays that don't look like the actor. So this one was always really special. My cousin Mike gave this to me. I'll never forget. So I'll always kind of cherish this one. He probably doesn't know I still have it, but I held on to all of my Star Wars stuff. So this guy, probably one of the more, I would say, played with Darth Mauls, just because he had all that cool articulation. You could take this on and off if you wanted to. So the original Darth Maul probably got pushed over to the side, and I'd be playing with this guy. So that's the third Darth Maul of this collection. Next up, we have what I would call an off-world Darth Maul. You never saw this one in the movies, and this had to be before the events of Episode 1. Maybe Darth Maul was training. He has that red lining on the suit. So I'm assuming this is either from a comic book or from an actual novel, the Star Wars books they used to do. So this one has some good points. It has some low points. This one has crazy articulation, especially for the times. And this is around the time, I'm going to guess, between Episode 1 and 2, where they were making figures in that really exaggerated pre-pose, which I think is super neat. And the things I don't like about him, he has some action features on the back, so you twist the back over there. It's supposed to spin his hands. It doesn't really work, but he does have more articulation than most 3.75 Star Wars figures, which is cool. So he does get bonus points for that. But this particular figure is a product of the times, and a good product of the times, because this is when they started doing magnetic parts. So magnetic hand holds the metal lightsaber hilt. So if you remember these, this to me was quality. I remember when the Jedi started coming out with metal lightsaber handles. I thought that was wild. So this is probably the best 3.75 lightsaber you will ever get. And it was also the time where you can take out the lightsaber parts. So if you just wanted him holding the handle, if you just wanted to have one lit up, you could do that, which is cool because prior to that, the only way to get the handle, they used to sell accessory packs. I don't think a single carded Maul came with a blank handle, but this one came with an accessory pack, and I know it did because it doesn't have some of the details on it. You can tell they did it kind of cheap. They didn't put the black lines on it, and I have an extra lightsaber that did come from that accessory pack. So these were cool, but now you can have kind of all the bells and whistles in this lightsaber. The one thing it probably could have done to be cooler was come apart so that we only have half, but I think that would have made this a little loose. So this thing, being a metal lightsaber, the magnetic hand, it just pops into his hand like that, and it stays there. That was the best era of Star Wars, if you ask me. And before we get to the last Darth Maul action figure, this is slightly different, but I guess we can still consider it an action figure, more of a statue. But we have the Star Wars Unleashed Darth Maul. I have all the ones I had as a kid. I still have them all. This one was my first one that I got, and honestly is my favorite one. I don't know if they were trying to compete with McFarlane, but they made these pre-posed figures. They look great on the shelf, especially when you have them all together. He's in that really exaggerated pose. A lot of the other figures looked more, I would say, movie realistic. This guy, they took some liberties with him. He comes with that sweet effect at the bottom, and he just stands in that base. So I mentioned wrestling before. My brother was a wrestling guy, and I made the comparison. I had Comtech for Star Wars, and he had the Titantron for WWF. Now, when these Star Wars Unleashed figures came out, he also had, I guess you can say, the opposite for wrestling. He had his own version of this for wrestling. WCW released figures that were pre-posed, and if you got all four, they connected to a ring. So he had these kind of statuesque figures. I had these. So it was kind of a cool kids' room, I guess. Not kids' room. We were kind of older, but half of it was wrestling, half of it was Star Wars, and we just had these kind of tales of two worlds going on. So this Darth Maul, Star Wars Unleashed, one of the best pieces I think I have and will ever own. I love these things. If I see these out in the wild, different ones I've never had, I might pick them up. And here we're looking at the last Darth Maul figure that I have, and this one serves a singular purpose. You really can't do much more with it. But I believe this came in the Power of the Jedi line, so it had a green box, and I remember seeing this 2-pack, and there was one major reason why I needed it. Now it comes with an Obi-Wan. I had other Obi-Wans, but this Obi-Wan comes with a Qui-Gon lightsaber, which you can take any of your other Obi-Wans, put them with a Qui-Gon lightsaber, you can have the same effect. That's not what's cool about this 2-pack. First off, you have Darth Maul coming with half the lightsaber, so you know we're getting closer towards the end of Duel of Fates. But the best part about this figure is the magnetic waist. So once Obi-Wan does him in, you can pull this part off and he can fall down the shaft. Really awesome. Slight detail that I always thought was really cool. Whenever Obi-Wan slices Darth Maul in half, his head kind of goes back, and the figure does it. So really simple, but I always thought that was so cool. So you can have Obi-Wan chopping Darth Maul in half, and then you can put him back together with that magnet. And that is all I got, folks. These, I believe, are all the Darth Maul figures I have. Kept them pretty well preserved since I was collecting back in the day. And I know there's been some amazing Darth Maul figures since, but I did quit collecting Star Wars in 2005. So every now and then I pull out all these figures and I go through them. So these are all my Darth Maul figures. You know, we have a bunch of days left in May. Maybe I'll pull out a bunch more Star Wars figures and kind of go through different stories, or, you know, maybe some fun facts. I don't know. There's 10 more days in May. I might be able to crank them out. But for now, hope you enjoyed this episode of one of my favorite characters, and probably yours too, Darth Maul. And until the next episode, we'll catch you next time.